Lovecraft Country has just premiered on HBO Max, and this is the Quarantine This review of the first episode of Lovecraft Country. This series is based on the 2016 novel by Matt Ruff, but all of his ideas for the novel came from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythology, which has loads of different old gods, elders, and deep interstellar reaching aliens that use many different forms to communicate and to get around, such as telepathy, swapping their consciousness for other consciousness, and being able to put consciousness into robots, or instantly transferring minds. There are plenty of other urban legend monsters that appear in the Cthulhu mythology, along with witches, familiars, swamp beings, and creatures from the years and the ancient world of the elders. H.P. Lovecraft goes into many in-depth details about what these creatures look like and the mythology revolving around them, such as having ancient cities in the Antarctic, Egypt, and cult of African worshipping voodoo people that want to stir up the Cthulhu again to embrace its new age. H.P. Lovecraft's novel starts off with people researching into the myth of Cthulhu, which they do via the hideous Necronomicon, which was actually started by Edgar Allan Poe's novels, and later taken up by the mantle of H.P. Lovecraft. So we can tell that this series is going to go into a lot of dark and different mythologies based around the Cthulhu mythology. And even in the trailer, you even get to glimpse at the Cthulhu itself. The main difference between the series and the books, though, is that the books were written between the late 1800s and the early 1900s. But Matt Ruff has placed his story in the 1950s. So it's taken away from the First World War era setting of the Cthulhu mythos and brings it more towards the 1950s to touch on the subjects that the author Matt Ruff wanted to touch on, such as racism throughout America. As this is one of the main talking points for Jordan Peele, you can perfectly see why they would choose him, who wrote and directed Get Out and Us, to further produce a series which is very black orientated around black history in America. And obviously J.J. Abrams has some great history in the films when it comes to monsters, creating monsters, and being able to transpose them onto the big and little screens via the other projects that he has done in the past. Now let's crack on with the review of Lovecraft Country. Starring Jonathan Majors as Atticus Freeman, Journey Smollett as Letitia Leti Lewis, Courtney B. Vance as Uncle George Freeman, Michael Kenneth Williams as Montrose Freeman, Orjanu Ellis as Hippolyta, Abby Lee as Christina Braithwhite, Wanmi Masuku as Ruby Baptiste, Jada Harris as Diana, Chase Brown as young Atticus, Marcus A. Griffin Jr. as teen Atticus, Mac Brandt as Captain Seamus Lancaster, Alex Collins as Crane, Jamie Chung as Gia, Jamie Newman as Dell, and Jonathan Pulowski as Burke. I have been reading the Lovecraft books recently, and this style of writing and pacing and the storyline that they give in this first episode is spot on to something Lovecraft himself would write. And the main inspiration for me seems to be coming from The Ritual and Shadow over Innsmouth's books that Lovecraft wrote in the Cthulhu mythology. The first episode of Lovecraft Country achieves exactly what it sets out to do. The script is well thought out with good individual acts that link and blend through together, going from one main topic of the 1950s racism to a monster storyline of Lovecraftian-esque imaginations by J.J. Abrams very well. The directing is of a good pace and nothing seems to be missed. There doesn't seem to be any off shots or any unneeded shots, and the beats never dwindle. It continues on a good medium and suspense-filling pace. The build-up from beginning to the middle to the end and the build-up to the rest of the series that is to come is fantastically put together, with good little hints into each character's background and past to let you know what mysteries have set this series up and why the characters go about their road trip. They fantastically put together the 1950s, showing the racism of that time, putting it in the script so that it works and is there to help not only the episode, but the overall storyline and arc of the series. They organically speak about their backgrounds and plots in a natural way, in a way that also represents the characters' personalities. The side characters in this series are well thought out as well, with good well-rounded personalities, with dialogue that helps solidify the other main characters, their connections with them, and the past that the main characters have spoken about. However, the white characters that are in this episode are all racists, and they are all quite 2D characters. They're not as well rounded, but they are just here for this episode. And they do have different aspects of personality that they are showing. Some of these 2D white characters in this episode only really have one aspect of their personality, such as either being scared, being aggressive, just being the goon, or being the person that goes along with it. But they do have individual 2D personalities. And even though about halfway through the episode, the white racism being shown was, to me, getting to be a bit too much, I thought it was well done because that's what it's supposed to do in the episode. It's supposed to show the racism of that time and how it was overboard, how it was too much, and how it was constant throughout. So therefore, it did work, but they did make every single white person in this series either a bad guy or an evil villain. There doesn't seem to be any side characters or normal characters or even characters that you briefly glimpse that are white that isn't or aren't being racist. There's a scene in the series where the main black characters stop to get petrol and white people are making monkey remarks at them. Yet again, this perfectly fits in and works well in this episode and the series that they are building up. But at the same point, they could have also had a car there with some white people looking at these racist white people with disdain on their face, just to even it out a bit. Not even in the 1950s on movies or series was every single black person shown stereotypically. This can be seen in Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry, better known by the stage name Stepin Fetchit, and he was an American vaudevillian comedian and film actor of Jamaican and Bahamian descent, considered to be the first black actor to have a successful film career. And shortly following him in the late 1950s was Sidney Poitier himself, who did a lot of work in Hollywood to represent and have black people represented in a different way. So in the 1950s, the main racism had slightly started to change. So to see this in that scene where they stop at the petrol station and see two white families, one being racist and the other one with disdain, would have been a nice thing to see. But like I say, the racism and all the white people being racists does fit in well with this episode, the series, the main storyline, the mysteries propelling it, and future events to come in this series really well. So therefore, I'll give it to them. The twists and turns they give in this episode through the conversations they have at the beginning of the episode and some of the directing and visual effects and cinematography they show really help out with propelling this episode further on. And they put in some of the ideas and imaginations and conclusions that you might have in your head about what is to come really well, putting in little seeds of interest and mystery into propelling it further. J.J. Abrams and Peele have done a brilliant job at working together in giving really good dialogue, a strong, grounded script that goes from everyday life of the 1950s to mysterious monster and paranormal of the 1950s really well. They blend them together and they mix them and they transcend from one to the other different genre without it coming across as jarring and without it breaking up the storyline in any way and without it getting in the way of you enjoying what is on the screen, what you're watching. And this series is a very enjoyable series with some great visual effects and graphics that really make your eyes pop out and your jaw drop in places. It doesn't shy away from the graphic violence either. There is quite a lot of blood splattering and violence at the end of this episode, so all the racism and the undertone of impending violence is there for a reason to build up to this, but the violence itself comes from a source you're not expecting. It doesn't come from the white men, it comes from the monsters of the Lovecraftian mythology. Everything they tried to do and the ideas that went into this series and this first episode are well executed and brought together perfectly. So far, for the first episode, this is definitely an 8 out of 10, and I can't wait to see where the rest of this series goes. Further ahead is a more in-depth, detailed review and analysis of Lovecraft Country, but it does have spoilers. So if you wish to miss any of the spoilers of the first episode, go and watch the first episode of Lovecraft Country now. Or go down to the description for the timestamps to skip to the conclusion and overall review of this first episode and what I hope to come from this series of Lovecraft Country in the coming weeks. And remember to also subscribe to our channel because I will be doing an original in-depth documentary about Lovecraft's life and the different mythos and beings in the Cthulhu mythology that he created through the Necronomicon that was first conceptualized by Edgar Allan Poe. I will also probably be doing an original documentary about Edgar Allan Poe as well. So remember to subscribe to our channel. But for now, let's get back to the in-depth analysis and review of the first episode of Lovecraft Country. The first episode of Lovecraft Country starts off in World War II with the main character of Jake running through the trenches. It becomes bright and colourful through the explosions that happen on screen. While this happens, we get a voiceover of a Lovecraftian-esque style speech. It's then that a massive Cthulhu-looking monster goes over Jake's head and UFOs appear in the sky. This really adds to the Lovecraftian-esque world that it is creating and also shows to the audience exactly what is going to happen throughout this series. It's a bit of a random opening scene, but it captures you quickly and gets you glued to the telly wondering what else is going to happen in this episode. But you can tell that it is a dream as soon as a baseball player comes up and smacks a Cthulhu being straight in half. And then he wakes up in a bus and instantly the showing of racism starts with not only their dialogue, but also the mise-en-scène and the signs above their head. They are on a bus travelling to an unknown location when the bus breaks down. And you see the main character of Jake looking through Lovecraftian stories. That's when they get picked up by the rescue service, who is only there, of course, to pick up the whites. So therefore, Jake and the black woman he met on the bus have to walk the rest of their way into town, while continuing to have a conversation about the racism that is happening around them. After this scene, we go to Chicago, where we meet Freeman and his wife. This scene has some great dialogue building and really lets you know the relationship between Freeman and his wife, how much they love each other, and the up and coming mysteries that will be happening are inserted into this first scene of dialogue between Freeman and his wife very sneakily and cleverly. After this scene, we then see a long line of pictures hung up on the wall explaining how some of these characters already introduced are related. It's then that Jake, the nephew of the family of the Freemans, comes in via the kitchen window to scare them. It's the daughter that finds them, she gets scared, and it's her slight scream that bring in the rest of the family that help the audience know just how they're connected and what certain storylines that involve the family are coming up. You find out that Jake's dad has been missing for 2 weeks, and in that time he has sent his son a letter. And it is this letter that is propelling Jake to go back to Freeman to find out what has happened to his dad. Something Freeman tells him he shouldn't continue on with and should just stay in town, and should just enjoy the festivities of the block party that is happening that night. Jake goes to find Freeman at his place of work so that he can talk about the letter that he was previously reading whilst waiting to be picked up from the broken down bus. This is where they go further into depth about his dad being lost and that he needs to go to Arkham to find him. And as far as Freeman is concerned, most of the stories from Lovecraft that Jake reads are based on real events. So they start looking into it and decide that they will go and head out together to go and find Arkham to find out exactly what happened to Jake's dad, Freeman's brother. After this, Jake goes across the street showing some good shots of the different aspects of life back in the 1950s. It shows some black kids signing up to the army and some black kids playing around in the street underneath some railroad tracks. Jake is off to find a person to help him figure out what happened to his dad. The person tells him that his dad went off with a rich white girl in a silver sedan. The day has now turned into night and the block party is well underway. We see a big crowd of people getting down to the black music that is playing when a mysterious woman rolls up and starts taking photographs. She walks up to the stage and you find out that she and the singer are sisters. The singer asks people what kind of music they would like to listen to, and a few of them shout out a couple of names from the radio, and the sister who is singing says that you don't want to be listening to that white shit music. Personally, I don't see the point in inserting this bit of showing racism into this part of the storyline. This was one of those times it wasn't really needed, and you could have just lent on the fact that these two characters are sisters and that's why they know each other. During this conversation, you also find out that the younger sister who has just come back has missed her mother's funeral, and her sister isn't happy about this. And due to the mother dying, they have lost their house and are now living somewhere else. And because of this, the money is very tight, so the younger sister can only stay for 2 days. She is given 2 days to find a job. We cut back to Jake and his dad, who are yet again talking about the racism of the 1950s until they get sidetracked about Jake's younger nephew drawing monsters onto road maps. Many of these monsters do look Lovecraftian-esque. Dad tells Jake where the address he was asking is about, and he talks about Ardham. And he tells Jake that he is going to go with him as well to find this place. So far, we're only 15 minutes in, but we've managed to go from introducing the characters, setting up the backdrop for the feeling of the episode, and implementing the mysteries that will further drive this episode and the series in the future episodes. Jake then goes back to his place and starts to settle in and starts to look around it as if he hasn't been there in quite some time. It's at this point he picks up his phone and dials and talks to the operator and asks them to put him through to South Korea, where a mysterious woman picks up. Jake doesn't answer back, and there is some brilliant acting in here because you can tell he wants to answer back, but he knows it's a bad idea for him to answer back. And the woman knows who it is on the other end, and she's talking to him, but because either she gets freaked out or he gets freaked out, he puts the phone down, but not before the mysterious stranger from South Korea says something in Cthulhu language. The mystery thickens even deeper, and we haven't even gotten into the main bulk of this episode. This is where the main episode starts. It starts off with Jake, Freeman, and the photography woman from earlier. In this scene, you also get a feeling that this family has some sort of mental link with the old ancient ones of the Cthulhu people and their different civilizations due to their comics, their drawings, and certain storylines they are putting into their drawings and artwork on the maps. And they're also showing different locations which will probably come up later on in the series, along with their mental connection with Cthulhu and the other ancient ones. As the bulk of the first episode sets off, we see the three main characters driving along America, listening to a Dr. King speech. And the dialogue the main characters have in this scene is very Black Lightning-esque. Very heavy on the politics of racism. And when they end up stopping in a diner nearby, instantly something is off with the place. As they stay there, the white people that are in there look at them oddly, seem to be scared of them, and seem to wander away from them. When Letitia gets up to use the restroom, she overhears a couple of the white people talking, and she gets rightfully scared. Meanwhile, Freeman and Jake are talking about the White House and why it's called the White House, because after the English burnt it and the blacks rebuilt it, they painted it white. This conversation happens because Jake realizes that they're in a house that looks like a converted slave house that has been badly burnt and repainted white. Probably burnt along with every black person that was in that town at that time. Then Letitia comes running out and tells them to get in the car. When they get in the car, a really good, well-choreographed car chase starts with good directing, good action scenes between the shooting and the guns. The acting of being scared comes across really well, and the hatred comes across in the scene as well. And this actually builds up to something that happens later where they flip this scene kinda on its head. As they escape the ongoing car chase, they see a silver sedan start to make its way towards them, towards a crossing that intersects the way they're going. Jake screams that he can see it, and they start driving quicker, only for the sedan to get in the way of them and their pursuers. When Jake looks back at the sedan and the rich white girl gets out, there's a look on his face that kind of shows that he knows her or is privy to knowledge of her. Finally, the Freemans and Letitia get to where they're going, and it is Letitia's brother's house. In this scene, we get some really good family dynamics and connections coming together. Not only can they have a civilized conversation around the table in a very nice house with a very nice spread and enjoy the time together, they also quickly talk about the racism that happened before naturally spinning it towards the mystery of Jake's dad and all these creatures and Arkham itself, because they're on their way to Arkham, a very prolific place in the Cthulhu mythology books. Afterwards, we see Freeman talking on the phone to his wife, saying how much he misses her and the kids and how much he loves them, and next time he goes on his travels, they should all come with him. You see him get a bit teary-eyed and down and depressed about the fact that he is away from his family. Meanwhile, Letitia and her brother are having a fight over the fact that she wasn't there for her mum's funeral, even though he had sent her some money, but she had used it to bail out some friends from jail. Meanwhile, outside, Jake is thinking about the letter and his dad when Freeman comes up to talk to him about it all. It's at this point you find out that Jake's dad wasn't the best, and that he left them, and that he never appeared to have any time for them, and was a bit abusive towards them. And the reason why he was a bit abusive towards his children and Jake is because Freeman mentions that their father was also abusive to him, that their father was abusive to them, but it was Jake's father that took most of his aggression and beatings to save the rest from receiving it. So there's a very mixed emotions going on within these family groups and their different siblings and the way they feel towards their nephews, cousins, uncles, brothers, sisters. It's not a very long scene, but it's very poignant, runs smoothly, and is very well paced, and gets across a lot of background information about the characters, the mystery that is unfolding in front of you, and how they're all connected together. Something that this series is definitely going to go further into as the mystery unfolds. When you catch up with Jake and his family, they are on the road to Arden, where they are headed, and they can't seem to find the turnoff. So it's at this point they get out of the car and start talking. They hear some noise happening in the forest, and Jake mentions one of the monsters from the Cthulhu mythos to scare his friend with. And it's at that point a cop car pulls up and obvious racism ensues. A lot of racism happens, a lot of poignant racism happens, well-scripted racism happens, and then they flip something on its head. The copper tells them that they've only got 8 minutes to get out of town, or else he will be arresting them, because this is a sundown town where no blacks are allowed to be in that town after sundown. However, he will arrest them if they go over the speed limit. So a very slow car chase ensues, spinning the car chase from earlier on its head very successfully, with a good twist and quite a funny moment inside this serious and dark monster series. They do manage to get away from him just in time, but only to come across a white racist roadblock, who then drag them into the woods and try to put them up for burglary charges, basically saying, say you did this crime or else we're going to kill you, and if you say you did this crime, we'll probably kill you anyway. It's at this moment that the setup from earlier, when the cop first turned up, when Jake mentioned about the Cthulhu type monster to his friend, pays off, and the monster from the Cthulhu mythology turns up to start attacking everyone. And the graphics are really good. This is where it starts to get very bloody and very gory very quickly. And everything suddenly hits the fan, and people are running away, people get scattered, and people get mauled to death. Jake and his friend end up inside of a cabin along with 2 of the white racist coppers, while Freeman is outside left to defend for himself against this unknown monster. Meanwhile, inside they're hypothesizing that it could be a monstrous vampire that's out on the loose, and maybe that's why it wasn't attacking them during the daylight, because it can't go out at day. It might hurt it. And it does hurt it, but mainly because it has 100 eyes all over its body and a massive mouth which just mauls people. And if it doesn't, then you get to see some pretty good graphics of the guy changing into one of them. And then everything else goes to shit quickly. And there's a lot more blood, a lot more gore, and a lot more really good visual and practical effects that happen. And in this action scene, everything is laid out, everything is set up, and everything has a payoff. And it feels like a good natural action scene that could happen in real life. Just as everything seems to be going to hell in a handbag, something calls the monsters away. A mysterious whistle, maybe from an adult version of the monster, or maybe from somebody controlling it. The episode ends with the Freeman and Letitia finding their way, finally, to Arkham, where they meet a mysterious white person who is in charge of the cult and who is embracingly welcoming them into their home, which he tells them is their home. This episode had a really good build-up for the first 15 minutes that set everything else that is going to happen in the rest of the series up really well. It then started on the episode with a good medium pace, giving you the correct atmosphere and putting you in a particular sort of mood and style of thinking so that you think it's going to go one way, but it keeps playing with you, putting things on its head, twisting things around enough to keep you entertained, to keep you amused, and to keep you wondering what's going to happen. And when it finally twists onto the main Lovecraftian-esque monster, it does so smoothly and also naturally, and in a way that yet again still makes sense and keeps in with the atmosphere and everything else that has preceded it beforehand, without it being jarring or without it being injected in there or without it being forced into it. I think they are taking the lore of the Cthulhu mythos in a different direction, as a lot of these stories come from a wealthy, rich white person looking into the Cthulhu mythos to try and stop it, while either the Black African-esque voodoo people of South America are trying to call up Cthulhu itself, or if the rich white people of Arkham and Innsmouth are trying to use the elder gods and the ancient ones to their own advantage, greed and wealth and power. This could be something that they are mixing together, and it could also mean that the ancient ones and the elder gods may yet again fight. Who knows where this series is going to take its main storylines, plots and twists to. This is a really good, engaging and successful first episode to a hopefully truly brilliant series. The Lovecraft Country is definitely looking like it's going to be a 10 out of 10 series, and for the first episode it is definitely an 8 out of 10 and worth checking out. Thank you very much for listening to the Quarantines This review of the first episode of Lovecraft Country. Please subscribe and hit that bell to keep up with notifications of our reviews of each episode of Lovecraft Country. And remember to subscribe so that you can keep up to date when we release the original documentary on Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythology. Check out our channel for further reviews and original documentaries. Thanks for watching, take care, and bye for now.